DC Comics have existed for only 6 years longer than live-action adaptations of DC Comics have, and over the years there are certain characters who have either been well adapted to live-action, or have even been perfected on screen. I made 2 videos going over the worst adaptations of DC characters, so I thought I'd make a more positive video. But this video will be a bit different, as I won't be skipping characters who never had any amazing adaptations. I will be looking at the 15 most recurring DC characters according to Comic Vine, and giving my own personal opinion about which of their live-action adaptations are the best. That does mean that some of the characters that go over aren't actually going to be all that great adaptations, they're just going to be the best that we've gotten, and while this won't happen in this video, if there is a part 2 to this video, I'll skip a character completely if their only adaptation ever is an adaptation that made it into the worst adaptations list, or if it's their only adaptation aside from a cameo. Characters who only have one single adaptation that didn't make that list, I will still mention, but I'll also mention whether or not I think that adaptation is any good. So with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the 15th most recurring DC character ever. Jimmy Olsen is a slightly outdated character, which is why recent adaptations have either straight up not bothered using him like Superman and Lois, changed him drastically like Supergirl, or did both, changed him drastically and then killed him off and not bothered to use him at all like in the DCEU. So if we're looking at the actual character of Jimmy Olsen in his roots, since I do think he's a bit of an outdated character, it makes sense that the best adaptation of him comes from an older interpretation, from an older movie, that being Mark McClure from the original Superman movies. The character from Smallville is also pretty good, but Jimmy Olsen recently in more modern adaptations has not been handled well at all. The Batgirl movie probably would have changed this, but Batgirl has yet to have a good modern interpretation in live action. Batgirl from the 60s show was a great adaptation of the more colorful and goofy comics of the time, but if we're looking at the more modern interpretations, none of them have been very good, and they've all been drastically different. Alicia Silverstone wasn't Batman and Robin, so obviously not. Savannah Welch on Titans was never really Batgirl on screen, and was never even Oracle either. They did this weird thing where they made her a police commissioner, even though she looks way too young for that, and Oracle was a Brother Eye-like machine. I do think that Savannah Welch was well cast and could have been a really good Oracle if they made her one, but they went down a really weird route with her. I might say Batgirl / Oracle from Birds of Prey, but if I'm being honest, I've never actually seen Birds of Prey, the TV show that is, so I'm not sure. The only thing I know is that her costume in that show as Batgirl was pretty good. So if I am being honest, I think that if I had to choose, I'd go with Savannah Welch from Titans, because I think she is well cast, and she's a good interpretation of Barbara Gordon, even though she's never Batgirl or Oracle. But Batgirl definitely needs some much better interpretations. The Joker is actually the second most recurring villain in the DC universe, which is a bit surprising to me. I thought he'd be the first. We're looking at his adaptations. There are 2 versions of the character that are really good, but one of them is just a bit, if not actually a lot better. Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was a great movie and his acting was fantastic. However, that version of Joker feels like a very different character. He's much less calculating, and honestly, he's not as evil as I'd expect Joker to be, and he couldn't possibly fight Batman. He just lucks his way throughout the entire movie. While Heath Ledger's Joker, on the other hand, is the perfect live-action adaptation of the most iconic comic book villain of all time. His scars and face paint are super creepy and a really unique adaptation of the look of Joker. His laugh is sinister, and obviously I'm not the first to say this, but Heath Ledger absolutely knocked it out of the park with this character. There's a reason he is as popular as he is, and I think it's well deserved. The actual most recurring villain in the DC universe is Lex Luthor, and I gotta be honest, I don't like any of his live-action interpretations in movies. However, his adaptations in 2 separate TV shows are both pretty good. The one that is not as good is John Cryer on Supergirl, as while he was fantastic in the 3 episodes he appeared in Supergirl Season 4, all of his appearances after that never really reached that height. He became way too goofy compared to those first 3 episodes, so he's not nearly as consistent, second as Michael Rosenbaum on Smallville, who has, for one, leaps and bounds more screen time than any other live-action Lex Luthor, which isn't always a good thing since a TV show amount of screen time sometimes leads to either an oversaturation of a character or a character going way past their peak a lot later. But Lex Luthor on Smallville was always one of the best parts of that show, and Michael Rosenbaum absolutely nails the character, just like how he nailed the voice of Wally West. There's only ever been 2 live-action interpretations of Green Arrow, Justin Hartley on Smallville and Stephen Amell on Arrow, and while Justin Hartley's Green Arrow is probably a bit more comic accurate, I would say that Stephen Amell's Arrow is leaps and bounds better as a character. I acknowledge that he's not actually a good adaptation of Oliver Queen. He lacks so much of what makes Oliver Queen. His sense of humor and more jokey personality is just not there. He lacks his politics and relationship with Black Canary, the latter of which really pissed me off, and they made him so much broodier and a much better fighter, which brought up a lot of criticisms of him being similar to Batman. Plus, he's not even called Green Arrow until season 4, and yeah, I agree with all of that, but despite being a bad adaptation, I'd be lying if I said I didn't like this character, because when Arrow was good, which looking back was actually over half of the show, Oliver was an incredibly compelling character. He had some interesting arcs, like some very interesting arcs and stories, and some of the most engaging rivalries that I've ever seen in superhero media, especially with Deathstroke, Merlin, and Prometheus, and he was incredibly badass. Arrow did fight scenes really well, like it's just behind Daredevil in terms of live-action fight scenes in superhero media. And by the end of the show, looking back, despite all of its inconsistencies, the one thing that stayed consistent, aside from season 4, is that I never stopped liking Oliver Queen as a character. All that being said though, the next version of Oliver Queen we see on screen should definitely be much more comic accurate because none of the other two had the relationship with Black Canary. They both married the blonde tech girl, which is crazy. Aquaman is my favorite member of the DCU Justice League, mostly thanks to having the best solo film in my opinion. The Aquaman movie really feels like an actual comic book come to life, thanks in no small part to the ridiculous and yet awesome looking costumes that Ocean Master, Black Manta, and Aquaman all wear. His gold and green costume is one of the best adaptations of a classic superhero costume ever put to film. One of those costumes that you never thought could look good on screen, and yet it looks incredible. Arthur himself is badass and so much fun to watch, and Jason Momoa was a perfect casting choice. He doesn't really look like exactly how you'd expect Aquaman to look, but honestly he makes Aquaman look a lot cooler, and then in the comics they based his recent design off of Jason Momoa. All that being said, there wasn't really much competition. I mean, there was the Smallville version played by Alan Ritchson, who wasn't very good. He plays a much better Hawk, and a pilot episode that never got picked up where Aquaman was played by Justin Hartley, so it was an easy win, but I think even if there was some stronger competition, the DCU Aquaman probably would have won anyway. He's my favorite member of the DCU Justice League. The Flash is a bit of a weird situation because there's 2 levels to this. If we're looking at an inexperienced, early days and naive version of Barry Allen, then that's been 100% nailed and consistently in the first couple of seasons of The Flash. I mean, Grant Gustin was great in those first couple of seasons, and there's no denying that people were loving it. I would even argue that Grant Gustin even proved himself as a better actor than Ezra Miller, mostly through his scenes and talking with his father in prison. So obviously with all that in mind, I do think that they did perfect an early days and inexperienced version of Barry Allen, but a more experienced one wasn't as consistently shown in the later seasons. That being said, if we're looking at individual episodes, there are certainly episodes where we did basically get the ideal live-action experienced Barry Allen, and the best of those is in Season 4, Episode 15, called Enter Flash Time. And if the rest of the seasons after Season 2 did what this episode did, and I'm not talking about the quality of the episode, I mean how competent Barry Allen is in it, and then I do think there would be no contest. It would easily go to Grant Gustin, but a TV show amount of screen time where a lot of those seasons are very, very bad and treat him pretty poorly lead to me wanting a better version of Barry Allen in the future, even though we got the best possible version of Barry Allen and an experienced one in that episode. James Gordon has been adapted a lot in live action, but in my opinion the best is Gary Oldman in the Dark Knight trilogy, as he's like one of the best castings in live action DC history. He looks exactly like James Gordon. It's honestly difficult to see anybody else in the role, and it's not like he only looks the part, he also acts it really well, and he's given a very impactful role in the trilogy, arguably being the second most important character in the trilogy behind Batman himself. There aren't many characters who have been perfected on screen from the DC universe, but I think James Gordon is one of them, and it's in the Dark Knight trilogy. Like Gordon, Alfred Pennyworth has had a lot of live-action adaptations, but I think Alfred Pennyworth is like a difficult character to not do well. He's like the most consistently great character in live-action DC history, which makes it hard to choose. I mean, he was even good in Batman and Robin, which is insane to say. All that being said, while they're all pretty good, I think the most memorable live-action Alfred is Michael Caine from the Dark Knight trilogy. He has what every other Alfred has, or at least every good version of Alfred has, which is being a man who raised Bruce Wayne, and despite never being called so, he is his father, which always elicits emotion if handled well. But also Michael Caine is a great actor, and this version of Alfred probably has the best dialogue out of any version of Alfred. It was close, like every single version of Alfred is good. The one from Gotham, the one from the DCU, and the one from the Batman, they're all good, but Michael Caine is just a wee bit better. The next character on this list is Hal Jordan, aka the Green Lantern, and I won't waste your time, I'll go over this really quickly. He's only ever had 2 live-action appearances. One of them barely counts, it's in Legend of the Superheroes from all the way back in 1979, which is barely even a TV show, and Green Lantern from 2011, played by Ryan Reynolds. The latter has to be the best live-action appearance because it's the only one. However, we definitely have not gotten a good live-action appearance for Hal Jordan. For Lois Lane, it's between Erica Durance from Smallville and Elizabeth Tulloch from Superman and Lois, as those two are miles better than any other live-action interpretation of Lois Lane. That being said, it is either recency bias or just because I like Superman and Lois a lot more so than Smallville as a whole, but I'm going to go with Elizabeth Tulloch as my pick for the best live-action Lois Lane. This is much more the case in Season 1 compared to Season 2. She definitely dipped in quality as a character in that second season, but Lois in Season 1 is perfectly portrayed as the sassy and incredible journalist that she is. Her and Clark's relationship is shown in a relatively new light and unique one, as in the show they've been together for over 15 years, which allows for a realistic take on a long-lasting marriage, something we haven't ever seen before in this, which is the most iconic couple in comic book history. There's also the added element of both Lois and Superman being parents, which adds a lot of complexity to their characters, which I really liked. She has great chemistry with Tyler Hoechlin's Clark Kent, and in general is a very, very good interpretation and adaptation of Lois Lane. Despite being a part of the Trinity, Wonder Woman is not nearly on the level of Batman and Superman in terms of their live-action adaptations, as cinematically she's only ever had one, and Gal Gadot's only real competition is Linda Carter in the 70s show, which is a pretty outdated TV show, and for that to be better, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman would have to be truly awful. And while Wonder Woman 1984 is a terrible movie, Gal Gadot has always been an acceptable Wonder Woman to me at the very least, and at times can even be pretty great. Her acting can use some work, but she definitely looks the part. Her costume was so good that the comics took inspiration from it. Her music is incredible, and the way her power is usually conveyed on screen, I think if Gal improves her acting and she starts appearing in better movies, better than Justice League and Wonder Woman 1984, then she can be a perfect live-action interpretation of Wonder Woman. Despite not being a member of the Trinity, Dick Grayson has more comic book appearances than Wonder Woman, and in my opinion, Dick Grayson has yet to have an actual great modern-day interpretation in live action. I think the 60s show was a great adaptation of, like I said for Batgirl, the 60s comics, where everything was fun and colorful and goofy, but if we're looking at the more modern comics Dick Grayson, I don't think any of them have been very good. In fact, there's only ever been 2, which is Chris O'Donnell, who appeared exclusively in bad movies, which really just leaves Brenton Thwaites from Titans, who could be good at times, he looks the part, and I absolutely love his Robin suit. That being said, he rarely ever wore that suit, and I don't really love his Nightwing suit. I think it's a bit too bulky and not all that well designed. In fact, I don't really like the Nightwing suit as much as the Robin suit at all in the comics. But beyond the aesthetic elements of this character, he's truly infuriating at times. He could be a good leader sometimes, but most of the time he's either like keeping things from his team, getting himself arrested on purpose, or knocking out Superboy and Krypto with kryptonite so they can't help out for absolutely no reason. Right from the get-go in the trailer with the fuck Batman moment, people could already tell that something was off, and they never really course-corrected, or at least they never course-corrected him enough. He's still a bit off from how I would want Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, to actually be. He's not a terrible character, and he's not even a terrible adaptation. I just don't like him very much. All that being said, he is the best adaptation of Dick Grayson in live action, at least a modern day Dick Grayson, because there isn't really all that good of a competition. For Superman, I'm well aware of how much of an unpopular opinion my choice is. I mean, Christopher Reeve is still hailed by many as the best Superman to this day. Henry Cavill is hugely popular amongst a specific group, but also I'd say he's probably the top choice for a modern day Superman adaptation, and even Brandon Routh proved that he could be great in the role. But Tyler Hoechlin is still my favorite live action interpretation of Superman. He was definitely shafted as a recurring character on Supergirl, but even when they tried everything they could to undermine him and make Supergirl look better compared to him, they failed every single time. He's still outshone her in every single one of his appearances, and was without a doubt the best thing to come out of that show. But then when he finally got his own show and finally was given the chance to shine on his own, he absolutely did and became the best live action version of Superman. That first season of Superman and Lois is some of the best DC television ever made, thanks in no small part to this great interpretation. He's incredibly likable while also being conveyed as immensely powerful at the same time. His Clark Kent is also much more developed and feels much more real compared to most other live-action Superman. The only exception is like Tom Welling, but he's only ever Clark Kent, so that's not fair. Anyway, there are definitely multiple great interpretations of Superman, but for me personally, Tyler Hoechlin is the best. And finally, the most recurring character in the DC Universe is, unsurprisingly, Batman, and my favorite interpretation in live action is Robert Pattinson from The Batman. I think that all other Batmen are missing something. Not to say that they're all bad, in fact most of them are pretty great, but they're all missing something. Either the lack of their no-killing rule, which makes it impossible for me to say that Batfleck or the Michael Keaton Batman are truly great adaptations, or the lack of generally good fight scenes, which Michael Keaton Batman also lacks, but the Dark Knight trilogy is affected by this, as the choreography in that trilogy is not all that great. Batman in general is not as badass as he should be. I think that Robert Pattinson's Batman has everything you could want in a good adaptation of at least an early days Batman who's still figuring it out. He is menacing and badass, and he's an actual detective. He has the no-killing rule, and while he obviously broods a lot, he also ends up being a symbol of hope for Gotham by the end, something that a lot of interpretations of Batman don't really consider. Robert Pattinson Batman is also lacking certain things, but these are things that are excusable since he is an early days Batman. I think that if by the second movie he still doesn't have the Bruce Wayne persona, something that the Dark Knight trilogy absolutely nailed, then it will be a lot less forgivable, unless they give him a Robin, in which case I'd forgive so much of the character's faults. Just give these characters Robins. Batman in the movies is like allergic to Robin, despite being a core aspect of the character. If Robert Pattinson's Batman gets a Robin and then builds a Bat family, he will blow every other live-action Batman out of the water. So that is it for this video, the 15 most recurring DC characters in the comics, and their best live-action interpretations. If you want to see a part 2 with the next 15 most recurring characters, then share this video, leave a comment so that it gets more views so that I'm inclined to make a part 2. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.